Uh, Hello everyone. This is Mr. Henry again, back for our second week of virtual learning. Um, I'll be covering the second part of this little unit on the Reformation, basically the spread of the Protestant Reformation, and we'll be focusing mainly on the reformers, the individuals who stepped forward to try and change a lot of things, who came to the forefront. What you need to have today, what you'll need, you make sure you've either downloaded the Spread of the Reformation note-taking sheet or printed it out so you can write it in. And you'll be turning in this note-taking sheet, and all of it needs to be completed, including the summary questions, all right? And now just a little bit of review of the overall Reformation from your last lesson. So the Reformation started because of various complaints by the religious community as a whole. One of those complaints was the indulgences. At the time, the Catholic Church was selling what were known as indulgences or pardons. Basically, it was a roundabout way to buy your way into heaven. If you had lived your life uh, in such a way where you most likely would end up not going to the upper room, let's say, uh, a priest would come to you and say, if you buy X amount of indulgences, we can shorten your time in purgatory, which I always view as kind of like a waiting room in the afterlife. But you can shorten your time from 500 years to 5 years. So you're basically just buying your way into heaven. Another complaint was the corruption in the Catholic Church and its overall selfishness. Um, at the time of the Reformation, the Renaissance was also happening. Um, Two big events in history, two big periods are happening basically parallel with each other. And remember, the one thing the Reformation was all about was artwork and beautification. And the church wants to get in on that, honestly. They want the churches looking more magnificent, more splendid. And one way they need to do that is by paying these artists. And so they use the land that they control and they tax the people there. So that overall corruption is really frowned upon by a lot of the other religious communities. Then there's the legitimacy of the Pope. The popes themselves are becoming more worldly and less religious. One of the popes, for instance, Rodrigo Borgia, was one of the most secular popes in history. But a lot of people are frowning on the lack of piousness, the lack of piety of the uh, popes themselves. And then, of course, there's the wrong message or false teachings that the church is putting out. Things that, like, the pope is the head of the church, um, that you need to have oh X amount of uh, uh, levels of forgiveness, things like that. But basically, just certain teachings that a lot of people didn't agree with. So these are the complaints of the Reformation. We'll be coming back to these. So we get to our very first reformer, and this is Martin Luther, who is the progenitor or the originator of the Protestant Reformation. He is located in Wittenberg, Germany. That's where he starts off. And some of his major reforms or ideas, of course, the 95 Theses, which kind of was the start of the Reformation. It was a list of complaints that he nailed to a church door, which was kind of like a bulletin board of the times. And some of the things he pointed out was that the true head of the church is Jesus and not the Pope, and that one way you can get into heaven is through faith and good works. You don't need like a priest to guide you there, which is one of those false teachings that I mentioned. Um, Something else Martin Luther was known for was translating the Bible to German so that more people could read it and have access to it. The Catholic Church really focused on the purity of it, and so Latin was what a lot of the services were in. And so, if only the priests understood Latin, they were the only ones who could interpret the Bible for people. But would they translate it into German or to other vernaculars? And the vernacular for Germany is German, vernacular for Italy is Italian, vernacular for France is French. More people had access to it, and more people could have their own understanding or interpretation of the Bible. And the overall reaction by both the Catholic Church and by the greater European world, you see Martin Luther is excommunicated by the Pope, um, and he is also considered an outlaw by the Edict of Worms. So there is a lot of negative reaction by especially the Catholic Church towards Martin Luther, but his ideas do pick up a lot of support as it goes forward. And so we'll take some time to answer the summary question. Did Luther address any of the issues or problems? And if you need to remember what those are, just jump back. Remember, I'll flash back to them real quick. The indulgences, corrupt or selfish church, illegitimacy of the Pope, wrong message of false teachings. So please take some time to answer that in a complete sentence. Elaborate on it. The stronger the answer, the better off you are. So did Luther address any of the issues or problems? Good. So let us move forward. And our next reformer is Ulrich Zwingli. Love saying his name, Zwingli. He is located two locations, Switzerland and in France. And some of his reforms or ideas that he really focused on was that the Bible is the truth and anything besides the Bible is not. So basically, the Bible is the only thing you should go by, not any other interpretation, only the Bible. And you shouldn't break away from it. That was pretty much Zwingli's whole focus. The overall reaction to Zwingli, though, he is killed in battle when a civil war erupts in Switzerland between the Catholics and the Protestants. Um, Zwingli was very much he was considered a radical in comparison to a lot of his other in comparison to a lot of the other reformers. Even Martin Luther viewed Zwingli as kind of a little more intense than what he should be. But the reaction to Zwingli is his overall death in battle. And so we move to our summary question again. Did Zwingli address any of the issues or problems during his tenure as a reformer during the Protestant Reformation? So go ahead and pause the video and flash back to the problems before, indulgences, legitimacy of the Pope, etc., etc. So go ahead and pause and answer the summary question. Complete sentence, please. All right. Welcome back. Let's move to our next reformer. That is John Calvin, who was located in Geneva, Switzerland. And so some of the ideas behind Calvin, one big idea that you make sure you know is the idea of predestination, which is the idea that God knows who will be saved before they're even born. So basically, before you're even born, it's already been predetermined, predestined, if you will be saved, if you'll go to heaven. And some signs that you were saved or that you were already predestined to go to heaven, or like if you were a hard worker and you ended up being very successful. It was very clear that if you were very successful, if you were hardworking, that those were like the little symbols or symbols or signs, that you were going to be saved. He also supported the idea that people should live a very simple life, simple clothing, no entertainment, no art, no luxuries, no frivolities, no frivolous living. Very simple, very humble life. And he was also known for sending missionaries to convert and spread his ideas, the Calvinist ideas, across Europe. The overall reaction to John Calvin, you see new branches form out of his beliefs, so it's very accepted. The Puritans and the Pilgrims, who are very well known during the Age of Exploration, which is what we'll be getting to soon, they are kind of formed out of Calvinist beliefs. There are people who find it very hard to stick to his style, his lifestyle of the simple life, and those people are exiled or executed. Those people who disagreed or broke his rules. And so, did Calvin address any of the issues or problems that uh, helped spark the Protestant Reformation? So go ahead and pause here and flash back to those. All right, wonderful. Let's continue forward. Make sure you answer the complete sentence and elaborate on your answer. The next reformer and our final one is Henry VIII, the King of England. So his location, of course, is in good old England. Some of his ideas. Well, let us first add a little context to um, Henry VIII. Henry VIII was a devout Catholic who was in full support of the Catholic Church, but like many kings, he needs to have an heir, and he doesn't have a son. He doesn't even have a spare, which is the backup. He doesn't have an heir or a spare. And so he wants to divorce his wife to marry someone else that could increase his chances of having an heir. And he goes to the Pope hoping to get this a divorce supported by the church. But the Pope does not view his wife's inability to have a son as a legitimate reason for a divorce, so he does not sanction it. And because of that, Henry leaves the Catholic Church because he wants to divorce his wife. He pushes for what is known as the Act of Supremacy, which makes Henry the head of the church, or not the Pope. And this is the new church that is formed in England, known as just simply as the Church of England. And a lot of people in England actually supported this break because they were tired of paying money to the Catholic Church. And he also took land away from monks and the churches and the Catholic churches there, because they were very unpopular and they had a good bit of money. And so that further garnered more support for Henry. Now, the overall reaction from this, the Pope excommunicates Henry for his action. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter if the Pope excommunicates Henry, because Henry is the head of the Church of England. He can just unexcommunicate himself or not even recognize the Pope's excommunication of himself. So that really doesn't do anything to Henry. And going further, once Henry passes on, one of his daughters, Queen Mary, she attempts to make England Catholic again, but then her younger sister, Queen Elizabeth, reestablishes the Church of England in England and reestablishes Protestantism. And what most people know Henry VIII for is, of course, all the wives he had. Well, before we move on to that, did Henry address any of the issues or problems and complaints that people had about that led to the start of the Reformation? So please answer your question in a complete sentence and elaborate on it. So go ahead and pause the video here and finish up. All right, good. Welcome back. No, sorry. What I was saying was before I kind of got off topic, I wanted you to answer the summary question. But a lot of what Henry is known for is, of course, all the wives he married. That was first Catherine of Aragon, who he divorced because she couldn't find him with a son. Then he marries Anne of Boleyn, who he beheads. Only you could solve all your problems with the beheading, right? You know what I'm saying? Right? You know what I'm saying. Next up was Jane Seymour, who died during childbirth. Then he marries Anne of Cleves, who he divorces also. Then you move on to Catherine Howard, who he also beheads. And then finally he marries Catherine Parr, who survives. So we take it back. Oh, hold up, let me take it back. You have divorce, beheaded, dies, divorce, beheaded, survives. Imagine the game this guy must have to just keep divorcing and beheading women and yet still is able to get another wife. Man, what an icon. You know what I'm saying? But Catherine Parr wins because she, of course, doesn't die or get divorced. And she actually outlives him. But by that time, he was an old man and he eventually passes away before she does. But yeah, the game, right? The game. Spitting that. But either way, some big takeaways from the spread of the Reformation. As the Reformation spreads and grows from where it starts with Martin Luther, it leads to the creation of a bunch of different religious groups, the Lutherans, who come out of Martin Luther's kind of idea mindset, the Anglicans, who came from the Church of England, the Calvinists, who came from John Calvin's kind of bag, and there are even more besides them. But all these growing religious groups are separate from the Catholic Church, and that weakens the Catholic Church's authority. And it also leads to a split in Europe religiously between, of course, Catholics and Protestants. And this begins to impact the politics of Europe as well, because many lords or nobles use the Reformation as an opportunity to rebel against their superiors, and even monarchs use the Reformation as a way to break away from the Catholic Church so that they can solidify more control over their own land rather than give some of that control to the church. But thank you for hanging in there for this lesson. Make sure you fully completed your note sheet for the spread of the Reformation. Make sure you've answered all the summary questions with a very strong answer with evidence. And we'll just keep moving forward. I plan to do the entire next segment when we get to the age of exploration, I believe, in the voice of Major Payne. Have a good day.